So I want you to try to picture a society for a second. Imagine a place where the classroom is just the absolute center of gravity.
Right.
Like if you look at a kid walking into their very first day of preschool in this country, the statistical expectation, systemic norm is that they're going to stay in that education system for 16.4 years.
Which is, I mean, it's just a staggering number to confront right out of the gate.
Exactly.
When you analyze global demographics,
Mhm.
16.4 years isn't just a high school diploma with like a bit of vocational training tacked on at the end.
Right, no.
You're looking at a population where the baseline expectation stretches well into university level
Yeah.
specialized education.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this, your mind probably immediately starts, building a profile of what this nation must look like.
No, for sure. You'd think high-tech hubs. Right.
Exactly. If everyone is studying for nearly 2 decades, you just naturally assume this has to be some heavyweight economic superpower.
Yeah.
You start picturing gleaming digital nomad hubs, massive manufacturing sectors, research and development campuses sprawling everywhere.
Right, because you assume a society hoarding that much human capital must be instantly converting it into, sky-high salaries and a booming GDP.
I certainly assumed that. I figured, okay, we're talking about a Nordic nation or maybe a hyper-developed Asian tiger economy.
But we aren't.
No, we are not. We are looking at the Marshall Islands.
Yeah. A remote nation of coral atolls, basically just scattered across the central Pacific Ocean.
And the jarring reality, this paradox that we're going to really tear apart in this deep dive today, is that despite this world-leading massive investment in human knowledge, the average income in the Marshall Islands is just $7,224.
Yeah, and just to put that into perspective for everyone, $7,224 is barely a third of the current global average.
Barely a third. It just fundamentally breaks the assumed rules of, how societies are supposed to work.
Right, it really does.
We're all taught that education is this undisputed engine of wealth. You put knowledge in, you get prosperity out.
That's the formula. Yeah.
But here we have a society that has seemingly maxed out the education metric, yet the economic engine is just sputtering.
Completely sputtering.
So what is the hidden social logic here? Why doesn't a 16.4-year education translate into economic power?
Yeah, that's the real mystery.
That is exactly the mission of today's deep dive. We are going to map out the anatomy of this, what I like to call this education income disconnect.
And to map that out, we're drawing on a highly specific longitudinal data set from the United Nations Development Program, the UNDP.
The UNDP, right?
Yeah. And we aren't just looking at a modern snapshot of today. We actually have the data tracking global human development from 1990 all the way through to 2023.
Which is great because it gives us, over 30 years of momentum?
Exactly. It allows us to see not just where the Marshall Islands is standing right now, but the actual trajectory of how they navigated the last 3 decades of global change.
But to make sense of all that data, we need a specific analytical lens, right?
Right.
So the foundational tool the UN uses here is the Human Development Index.
The HDI.
Yeah, the HDI. And before we get too deep in the weeds, can you just translate some of these acronyms for us? Because I know the UN loves their acronyms.
Oh, they definitely do.
Yeah.
So the HDI is essentially a 3-dimensional scorecard for a society.
Okay.
It doesn't just look at how much money a country makes. It measures health, education, and the standard of living. It treats human life as, more than just a financial output.
I love that. So it's not just about the GDP.
Exactly. But then we have other lenses, too. There's the GDI and GII, which look specifically at gender equality and female empowerment.
Got it.
Then there's the IHDI, which adjusts the score based on actual inequality within the society. And finally, the PHDI, which this one is relatively new, measures the planetary pressures.
The planetary pressures.
Yeah, like a society's carbon footprint. It basically asks, what is the Earth's price tag for this development?
Okay, that makes sense. So it's almost like a set of different camera lenses, right?
I think that's a good way to put it.
Like you swap the lens and each one reveals a completely different layer of the exact same society.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But that HDI is our ultimate baseline. Before we can even begin to understand the paradox of the Marshall Islands, we really have to understand the global tide they're swimming in.
Right. We have to know what normal looks like.
Exactly. We have to calibrate our understanding of normal development on a planetary scale.
Okay, so pull up that global picture. When you trace the global HDI from 1990 to 2023, the overarching narrative is actually, it's one of relentless, quiet progress, isn't it?
It really is. It's actually one of the most encouraging trends in modern statistical history, to be honest.
Really? Even with everything going on?
Yeah, I mean, in 1990, the global HDI value sat at 0.608. And over the next 30 years, despite regional conflicts, financial crises, political upheaval,
The dot-com bust, the 2008 crash.
exactly. Despite all of that, the global average experienced a steady, robust, almost completely uninterrupted climb. By 2019, the world had pushed that index up to 0.745.
Which is huge. It's just the testament to, the compounding returns of global science, agricultural efficiency, basic sanitation.
Right. It's a slow burn of human progress.
But then the data just hits a brick wall,
Yeah. The 2020-2021 contraction.
right?
For the first time since the inception of the index, we documented a rare consecutive 2-year decline. Wow. The global HDI didn't just stall out, it actively reversed, dropping from 0.745 down to 0.742.
It's just deeply unsettling to see that on the graph.
It really is.
You have 3 decades of an upward slope, this sheer testament to human ingenuity, and then it bends backwards.
Yeah, it's the statistical footprint of a global trauma. It was a period where compounding health crises and sudden economic standstills literally erased years of human progress across the board.
Like, literally wiped it out.
Wiped it out.
Yeah.
But the systemic shock was profound, right? Yet the data also reveals the sheer resilience of the global infrastructure
Because it bounced back.
because it bounced back. By 2023, the global average hadn't just recovered its lost ground, it rebounded to an all-time historical high of 0.756.
Okay, so 0.756 is the high watermark for humanity right now.
Yes.
That is the global average. Let's bring the Marshall Islands into the frame now.
Let's do it.
Where do they sit against that 0.756 baseline?
Well, they sit right on the edge of what the UN categorizes as the high human development tier.
Okay.
Their HDI score for 2023 is 0.733. Out of 203 countries and territories measured, the Marshall Islands ranks 113th.
Okay, wait, let me process that. So the world is at 0.756 and they are at 0.733.
Right.
They are just a fraction below the global average. They're sitting almost perfectly in the middle of the pack.
Yes, exactly in the middle.
Now, my initial reaction to that is actually, quite positive.
Oh, sure. On the surface, it looks great.
Right, because if you have an isolated nation of coral atolls, thousands of miles away from major continental trade routes, and they are managing to keep pace with the massive industrialized global average, that seems like a massive win.
It does.
I mean, I just assume they must be surfing the global wave of technological advancement, right? Importing satellite internet, modern medicine, and standardized curricula just to keep their society right in the middle of that global current? Are they just surfing that wave?
Well, that assumption makes total sense, but the data actually pushes us in a completely different direction.
Really?
Yeah. This is the inherent danger of an average score. A score of 0.733 doesn't mean a society is performing at a perfectly average level across every single metric. Often an average score masks terrifying extremes.
Right. The math just smooths it all out.
Exactly. The Marshall Islands didn't arrive at 0.733 by being thoroughly mediocre at everything. They arrived there because they have specific, towering triumphs that are aggressively masking deep structural vulnerabilities.
Okay, so it's not a flat landscape at all. It's a society of high peaks and deep valleys, and when you smooth it all out, you get 0.733.
Precisely.
So to actually understand what is happening on the ground, we have to dismantle that average.
We do.
We need to pull apart the HDI into its 3 foundational dimensions, starting with, the most basic requirement for human development, life itself.
Right. The first dimension is health, and it's measured through a very uncompromising metric, which is life expectancy at birth.
Okay.
And this is where we encounter the first major structural valley for the Marshall Islands.
Let's look at this health hurdle.
Yeah.
Because the global life expectancy as of 2023 stands at 73.4 years.
Yep.
And if we break that down by gender, globally, women are living to about 75.9 years and men to 71.0 years. That's the baseline of human longevity right now.
Now, I want you to compare those figures to the Marshall Islands.
Okay.
Their overall life expectancy drops to 66.9 years.
Wow.
Yeah. For Marshallese women, it is 69.3 years, and for the men, it falls all the way down to 64.9 years.
64.9. So that is a 6.5-year gap compared to the rest of the world.
A massive 6.5-year gap, yes.
I just want to pause and really think about the gravity of that number for a second.
It's heavy.
It is. We throw around statistics like 6.5 years so easily on these deep dives, but you have to translate that into lived human experience.
Right.
If you are listening to this, I want you to imagine removing 6.5 years from the end of the life of everyone in your community.
It's devastating.
That is an entire generation of grandparents who simply aren't there. It means missing high school graduations, missing the birth of grandchildren.
Yeah.
From a societal standpoint, it means losing your community elders, losing oral history, losing the emotional anchors of a family structure far earlier than almost anywhere else on Earth. The human toll of a 6.5-year deficit is incredibly heavy.
It really alters the entire psychological and social fabric of a community.
It has to.
And as analysts, we have to ask about the mechanisms driving this. Why is there a 6.5-year penalty simply for being born in the Marshall Islands?
Right. What's causing it?
The answer largely lies in the brutal realities of their geography. We are talking about two parallel chains of coral atolls spread over roughly 750,000 square miles of the Pacific Ocean.
750,000 square miles, just delivering like a bandage across that kind of territory is a logistical nightmare.
Exactly, let alone providing complex medical care.
Right.
The medical accessibility challenge is immense. Like in a continental nation, if someone suffers a complex cardiac event, you put them in an ambulance and drive an hour down a paved highway to a specialized urban hospital. Right?
Yeah, happens every day.
But in an archipelago, critical care requires maritime transport or small aircraft flights. And those are highly dependent on weather conditions.
Which are unpredictable.
Very. You cannot simply build and staff a state-of-the-art specialized tertiary hospital on an atoll with a population of a few hundred people. The economies of scale for healthcare simply do not exist in that environment.
So if you have a chronic condition or you need specialized surgery, the geography itself is actively working against your survival.
It absolutely is.
But it can't just be about access to emergency rooms, right? Like, is there a shift in what is actually making people sick in the first place?
Yeah, that's the other half of the equation. The geography forces a dietary and environmental shift that is heavily driving this mortality rate.
How so?
Like many remote island nations, the Marshall Islands has experienced a massive transition away from traditional local subsistence diets, things like fresh fish, breadfruit, taro.
Real whole foods.
Right. And they've shifted towards imported, highly processed foods. When your food has to arrive on a cargo ship and sit on a shelf for months, it tends to be high in refined sugars, sodium, and preservatives.
Oh, man. Which perfectly sets the stage for a surge in non-communicable diseases.
Exactly. You see a staggering rise in diabetes, hypertension, and cardiovascular diseases.
Which are the exact diseases that are hardest to treat in that environment.
Right. These are chronic conditions that require decades of consistent, specialized management. Daily medications, dietary counseling, regular blood work.
Which brings us right back to the geographical nightmare.
Full circle.
You have a population developing chronic diseases that require the most consistent, high-touch medical infrastructure, living in an environment that naturally resists the building of that very infrastructure.
It is a compounding structural crisis. They are fighting a losing battle against distance and supply chains.
Wow. Okay, so the health dimension is a deep, deep valley, dragging their overall human development score downward.
Oh, it is.
But this is where the picture violently shifts.
Yes, it does.
Because if health is their greatest vulnerability, we turn to the second dimension of the HDI and we find their absolute superpower.
Dimension 2, knowledge.
Right. Because if the healthcare system is deeply strained by the geography, you would logically assume that the rest of their civic infrastructure is equally under-resourced.
That's a natural assumption, yeah.
You'd assume schools are struggling, graduation rates are low, and higher education is practically non-existent. But the data completely shatters that assumption.
Completely shatters it.
Let's look at the expected years of schooling, or the EYF. The global average for 2023 is 13.0 years. That basically gets a person through primary and secondary education.
And in the Marshall Islands, the expected years of schooling is 16.4 years.
16.4. They are outperforming the global average by 3.4 entire years.
And that is not a rounding error.
No. That is essentially an entire undergraduate degree's worth of extra time spent inside a classroom applied across the statistical average of the nation.
It's phenomenal. And the disparity becomes even more pronounced and frankly more fascinating when we look at how this plays out across gender lines.
Oh, right, the gender split. Let's get into that.
Largely, women are expected to stay in the education system for 17.0 years.
17 years.
While the men are at 15.8 years.
Okay, so not only is the nation as a whole highly educated, but the women are significantly outpacing the men in their educational attainment.
Significantly.
Let's really unpack the mechanics of this, because we are looking at a society where the average woman is receiving 17 years of formal education. That means if she starts preschool at, say, age 4, she isn't leaving the system until she is 21 years old.
Basically. Yeah.
We are talking about universal college-level schooling as the societal baseline for women. That doesn't happen by accident.
No, it doesn't.
That requires a massive cultural reverence for the classroom.
It points to a deep systemic commitment to knowledge as the primary vehicle for advancement. And the historical data confirms this isn't a sudden fluke either.
Really? How far back does this go?
Well, if you trace the numbers back to 2016, female expected years of schooling was already high at 14.9 years, and it has just steadily grown year over year to reach that 17.0 mark.
That's incredible.
Education is the absolute core driver of the Marshall Islands Human Development Score. Without this extreme overperformance in the classroom, the weight of their healthcare challenges would pull their overall HDI ranking down drastically.
So they are literally educating their way up the global ranks.
That's exactly what they're doing.
But this brings us face to face with the central paradox of our deep dive.
Here we go.
I want you to think about the economic mechanics of a society like this. If you have a population, and specifically a female population, that is universally educated to a university level, you would expect the economy to be on fire.
Right, you really would.
You have a highly literate, highly trained workforce. The human capital is overflowing. They should be exporting advanced digital services, dominating specialized consulting, running complex remote work economies.
All of the above.
The economic output should be a geyser, so where's the money?
And that question leads us directly into the third dimension of the HDI, the economic output.
Okay.
This is where we confront the wealth disconnect.
Let's lay out the financial reality then. The global gross national income, the GDI per capita adjusted for purchasing power, was $20,327 in 2023.
Right. And in the Marshall Islands, the GDI per capita is just $7,223.
They're generating barely 35.5% of the global average wealth.
It's a staggering drop.
I just want that friction point to really sink in for everyone listening. They boast 3.4 more years of education than the global average, but they generate 65% LSS income.
Yeah.
The correlation between knowledge and wealth is completely broken here.
High education is simply not translating into high economic conversion. And when we apply the gender lens to the income data, the structural failure becomes blindingly obvious.
Let's see it.
We established that women are in the education system for 17 years, outpacing the men.
We're up 17.0 years.
Yet the female GNI in the Marshall Islands is a mere $5,186.
$5,000 a year? Are you kidding me?
I wish I was. While the male GNI sits at $9,161.
Wait.
Yeah.
Men are making nearly double the income despite spending over a year less in the classroom.
That is what the data said.
It's like, okay, think of it like this. It's like they spent billions of dollars and decades of effort building this massive state-of-the-art nuclear power plant.
Okay, I like this analogy.
That is their education system, right? It is humming. It is generating incredible, limitless potential energy. You have these brilliant, highly educated 24-year-old women ready to power the future. But the society entirely forgot to lay down the electrical grid to connect the power plant to the city.
Yes.
The energy has nowhere to go. The political and economic infrastructure of the island simply isn't wired to receive or utilize this massive level of human capital.
That is the precise mechanical failure happening here.
Yeah.
You really have to ask yourself, what is the actual economy of an isolated atoll nation?
Right. What are the jobs?
It relies heavily on public sector employment, foreign aid, commercial fisheries, and copra production, which is dried coconut meat used for oil.
So highly physical or basic administrative stuff.
Exactly. These are sectors with massive structural limitations. A 17-year education prepares you for a knowledge economy, right?
Right.
But if the local market is largely constrained to basic services and administrative roles that are heavily reliant on external funding, well, the highly educated workforce has no outlet.
They are completely overqualified for the economy that actually exists on the island.
Vastly overqualified.
So you have a 24-year-old woman with a master's degree, and she looks around, and the jobs available simply do not match her capacity.
Which forces a really devastating choice. You either succumb to underemployment.
Which kills morale.
It does. Or you emigrate to a larger continental economy that can actually absorb your skills.
Right, like moving to the U.S. or Australia.
Exactly, which results in a massive brain drain for the Marshall Islands.
But wait, the lack of a varied economy has to be only half the story, right? Because even within that limited economy, men are making double what women make.
Good catch. Yes, to truly understand why a 17-year education results in a $5,000 income specifically for women,
Yeah.
we need to introduce a new set of metrics.
Okay.
We need to look through the gender indices to uncover what I call the shadow of the market.
All right, let's bring in the GDI, the Gender Development Index, and then the GII, the Gender Inequality Index. Let's start with the GDI because it actually highlights a major victory, doesn't it?
It does. The GDI measures the basic equality in human development achievements, health, education, and basic living standards between men and women.
Okay, basic foundational equality.
Right. It's calculated as a ratio. A score of 1.00 means perfect parity. The global average for the GDI in 2023 grew 0.955.
Pretty close to parity.
But the Marshall Islands actually exceeds the global average, scoring 0.960.
Wow, okay. So in the foundational stages of life, the society is incredibly equitable.
Very much so.
Access to the clinic and access to the classroom are shared fairly. In the schools, women are not just participating, they are dominating.
They are.
That is the dawn of equality. That's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But the dawn doesn't last.
Ugh.
Once a woman leaves the classroom and enters the adult world of power and capital, we have to look at the Gender Inequality Index, the GII.
Right.
Because this metric doesn't measure basic capability. It measures active empowerment. It looks at the labor market and political representation.
And the data here is less beautiful.
The data here is staggering. Let's examine political empowerment first. Globally, as of 2023, women hold 26.5% of parliament seats.
Which objectively is already a dismal global average. We are still nowhere near global parity.
Right, it's low everywhere.
Yeah.
But in the Marshall Islands, women hold a mere 12.1% of parliament seats.
Wait, I need to trace this back. A 12.1% representation in 2023. If I look at the historical data here, in the year 2000, it was just 3%.
Just 3%.
It flatlined at 3% for a decade, bumped to 9% around 2015, slid back down to 6% in 2019, and only recently crossed the 12% mark.
That's right.
We're talking about a society where women are universally educated to a university level, yet they are almost entirely excluded from making the laws of the land.
And that exclusion extends directly into the economy.
Let me guess. The labor force participation.
Look at the female labor force participation rate. In the Marshall Islands, it is only 42.7%.
Less than half.
Less than half.
This is where the narrative fully breaks for me. We have a society where women study for 17 years. They are more educated than the men. They are vastly more educated than the global average.
By years.
But less than half of them are even participating in the formal workforce. And barely 1 in 10 lawmakers is a woman.
It's a huge disconnect.
We are looking at a culture that aggressively champions the intellectual development of its women, pushing them to excel academically, but then completely shuts the door when it comes to boardroom leadership or parliamentary power. Are they happy to educate women but not let them lead?
The societal mechanics are deeply entrenched. Traditional gender roles regarding domestic responsibilities, elder care, and child rearing often assert themselves the exact moment formal education ends.
Right, the cultural expectations take over.
Yes. The Marshall Islands has fundamentally solved the problem of building intellectual capacity. But those women collide with a massive structural glass ceiling the moment they step off that graduation stage.
Wow.
The political and economic systems simply have not evolved to absorb the human capital the education system is furiously producing.
It's honestly a profound systemic betrayal.
That's a strong way to put it, but yeah.
I mean, you follow all the rules, you stay in school, you put in the 17 years of hard work, and the architecture of the society simply isn't built to let you wield that knowledge.
This is incredibly frustrating.
It feels incredibly unfair. But, you know, this realization about structural fairness makes me wonder about the broader societal fabric.
Okay, where are you going with this?
Well, if the gender distribution of power is this skewed, what does the fairness of the entire society look like across all demographics? Like class, geography, income.
To answer that, we introduce perhaps the most revealing lens of all, the IHDI.
The Inequality-Adjusted Human Development Index.
Yes. This metric is absolutely crucial because it acts as a reality check on averages.
Right, because averages lie.
Exactly. Think about it. If a country has a massive GDP, but 90% of that wealth is hoarded by a handful of billionaires while the rest of the population lives in poverty, the standard HDI might still look artificially high.
It looks great on paper.
But the IHDI strips away that illusion. It actively discounts a country's development score based on how unequally health, education, and income are distributed across the actual population.
So it measures the lived reality of the average citizen rather than just the mathematical mean.
Precisely. And the global reality is pretty sobering.
Tell me.
When you adjust for inequality globally, the world's human development score suffers a massive loss of almost 22%.
22%.
Specifically, 21.96% of human development is essentially lost or rendered inaccessible due to unequal distribution.
That's depressing. So the global average looks decent on paper, but a massive chunk of humanity is totally locked out of experiencing it.
Correct.
So how does the Marshall Islands hold up under this inequality penalty? Because they have a low overall income, they have these massive geographic challenges. You would naturally expect their inequality to be severe.
Well, the data reveals a massive victory for their social structure here.
Really?
Marshall Islands only suffers an inequality loss of 14.6%.
Wait, 14.6%? That is dramatically better than the global average.
It reveals a remarkably equitable distribution of their resources. Because their baseline inequality is so low, look at what happens to their position on the global stage.
Let me check the rankings.
In the standard HDI rankings, they sit at 113th, right?
Yeah.
But when you adjust the entire world for inequality using the IHDI, the Marshall Islands leaps all the way up to 85th place.
That is a 28-spot jump simply because they share what they have fairly.
Exactly.
I mean, think about how difficult it is to provide equitable access to education and healthcare across hundreds of miles of open ocean.
It's practically impossible.
Yet they manage to distribute access to the clinic and the classroom far more fairly than nations with vastly greater wealth.
They do.
It's like, okay, another analogy. It's like finding out a small market sports team, operating on a shoestring budget, actually has the most elite, sophisticated passing game in the entire league.
Oh, I like that.
They don't have superstar resources. They don't have the big money. But their internal teamwork is practically unparalleled. They share the ball better than the world champions.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
It points to a deep cultural emphasis on egalitarianism and community care.
Yeah.
They do not have a massive economic pie to share, but the societal fabric ensures it is sliced incredibly evenly. It is a profound strength.
So they share their internal resources exceptionally well. But we live in a physical, finite world. Generating any level of development requires extracting a toll from the earth.
It always does.
And this brings us to the final and arguably most urgent dimension of our deep dive. What is the environmental cost of their development?
We measure this using the PHDI.
The Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
Exactly. This lens evaluates development by attaching a direct price tag to carbon dioxide emissions and material footprint per capita.
Okay, so it penalizes dirty growth.
Right. If a wealthy nation achieves its high standard of living by aggressively burning fossil fuels and clear-cutting forests, the PHDI severely penalizes their score.
Makes sense.
Globally, when we account for planetary pressures, the Human Development Index drops by 10.05%.
We are burning the house down to keep warm, essentially.
Basically, yes.
So how does the Marshall Islands fit into this environmental equation?
Well, the data forces us to confront a brutal structural trap. Let's trace their per capita CO2 emissions over the last 3 decades.
Okay, lay it out for me.
In 1992, the Marshall Islands emitted 1.60 tons of carbon dioxide per capita.
Which is pretty low.
Very low. But by 2003, it crept up to nearly 2 tons. By 2013, it hit 2.7 tons.
Yeah.
And in 2023, it reached 3.65 tons.
3.65. So their emissions have more than doubled in 30 years.
More than doubled.
No, we should contextualize that, right? Because the global average per capita emission is 4.53 tons. So the
Right.
Marshall Islands is still operating below the global average.
They are.
But the trajectory is a steep, undeniable climb. And the implications of that climb are uniquely terrifying for them.
They are. The profound catch-22 here is that the Marshall Islands is an atoll nation sitting mere meters above sea level.
Right.
They are arguably one of the most physically vulnerable sovereign nations on Earth regarding climate change. Rising sea levels and intensifying storms driven directly by global carbon emissions pose an existential threat to their very landmass.
They could literally disappear.
They are on the absolute front line of climate catastrophe, yet their own carbon emissions are rising rapidly.
This is the part that demands deeper analysis. I mean, if you are the nation most threatened by a sinking geography, why are your own emissions doubling?
Right. It seems contradictory.
Why wouldn't you be the global pioneer of green, sustainable energy?
Because of the ruthless economics of survival on an isolated microgrid? Always money. Transitioning society from fossil fuels to sustainable energy, installing massive solar arrays, building robust wind farms, deploying industrial-scale battery storage, all of that requires an astronomical upfront capital investment.
Which they don't have.
Exactly. It requires specialized engineering, continuous maintenance, entirely new grid infrastructure.
And we just established that their average income is $7,200. They do not have the capital to build a futuristic green grid from scratch.
Exactly. For a remote nation with limited economic output, purchasing diesel fuel and running it through generators is often the only financially viable, immediate way to keep the lights on,
To keep the hospitals running.
to power the desalination plants for fresh water, to keep those schools running for 16.4 years.
Oh, wow.
The initial cost of a diesel generator is low, even if the long-term fuel costs and environmental costs are absolutely disastrous.
It is a horrifying realization.
It really is.
We are looking at a brutal manifestation of global climate inequality. Think about it. The industrialized world spent a century burning carbon to build massive wealth.
Yep.
Now, the oceans are rising because of that wealth generation, and the Marshall Islands has to rapidly develop its economy just to afford the seawalls and the infrastructure required to survive the rising water.
Right.
But because they lack capital, the only way they can afford to develop is by burning the cheapest available fuel, which is carbon.
It's a vicious cycle.
The global system literally forces the most vulnerable people on Earth to participate in their own environmental destruction just to afford basic day-to-day survival. Are we basically forcing developing nations into a corner?
It's a feedback loop with existential stakes. The burden of the green transition is falling disproportionately on the nations least equipped to fund it, and who are guaranteed to be erased from the map if the global transition fails.
Wow. So we have mapped out a deeply complex society today.
We really have.
We have a 6.5-year deficit in life expectancy driven by geography and diet. We have a world-beating 16.4 years of education that crashes into a severely limited economy, creating this massive wealth disconnect.
The paradox.
We see women excelling in the classroom but blocked from parliament and the formal workforce. We see an incredibly fair, egalitarian social structure that is simultaneously trapped in a carbon feedback loop just to survive.
It's a heavy burden.
Despite all these heavy compounding burdens, what is the actual trajectory of the Marshall Islands? Are they sinking under the weight of these paradoxes, or are they moving forward?
Well, the data shows remarkable perseverance.
It does.
Yeah. If we track their global HDI rank over the last decade, between 2011 and 2023, the Marshall Islands slowly climbed from 126th place to 113th place.
A steady, hard-fought climb of 13 spots on the global ladder.
They are advancing, and based on our analysis, they are dragging themselves up those ranks almost entirely through the sheer brute force power of their educational investment.
That's pulling them up.
It is. But if they want to accelerate that climb, if they want to translate that knowledge into actual prosperity, we have to clearly define the structural bottleneck holding them back.
Okay.
Imagine the society as a systemic flowchart.
Let's visualize that flowchart. What does the input look like?
The input at the top of the system is massive potential energy. 16.4 years of expected schooling, peaking at 17 years for women.
So a flood of high-quality human capital entering the system every single year.
Exactly. But then that flood hits the center of the flowchart, which is just choked with process blockages.
Right.
The human capital collides with the structural reality.
Okay.
You have an economy that can't provide specialized jobs, leading to a mere 42.7% female labor participation rate.
Ouch.
You have a political culture that resists female leadership, resulting in only 12.1% of parliamentary seats held by women. The system is entirely incapable of metabolizing its own potential.
And so the output at the very bottom of the flowchart trickles out as a meager GNI of $7,223.
That's the output.
The math of the societal failure is undeniable. The Marshall Islands has successfully built a massive, deep reservoir of intellectual power, but they haven't built the aqueducts required to let that water flow into the fields of the economy and the political arena.
And until those aqueducts are built, the societal wealth will never match the educational investment. But the data provides a very clear diagnostic, which means it also provides a clear prescription.
Okay, let's hear the prescription.
Based on the 30-year trends we've examined, the Marshall Islands faces 3 vital paths forward if you are to break the paradox.
Let's lay out the blueprint. Solution number 1 has to be about dismantling that bottleneck we just described, right?
Yes. Number 1, they must translate the education dividend.
Meaning?
The society has to actively dismantle the traditional and structural barriers, keeping highly educated women out of the formal workforce and out of government.
How do they do that practically?
This might require aggressive policy shifts. Think childcare infrastructure, specialized economic zones to attract digital or remote industries, and deliberate political quotas to normalize female leadership.
They have generated the knowledge. Now they must grant the agency.
Exactly. Solution number 2 has to address the physical survival of the population, specifically that terrifying health metric.
Number 2, strengthen the medical infrastructure.
Right. A 6.5-year life expectancy gap is unsustainable. Closing it requires targeted investments that specifically overcome geographic isolation.
Like what? Drones?
Maybe.
Yeah.
But definitely expanding telemedicine capabilities, investing in robust, weather-resilient inter-island medical transport, and a massive public health pivot toward preventative care and dietary reform.
To combat those non-communicable diseases before they require complex hospital interventions.
Exactly. And finally, solution number 3 must break the climate catch-22.
Number 3, the sustainable transition.
They must find a mechanism to decouple their economic growth from their carbon emissions. They simply cannot afford to double their CO2 output again over the next 30 years.
But we established they can't fund this alone.
They can't. It requires the international community to heavily subsidize and engineer the transition of their remote, diesel-dependent grids into resilient, renewable energy systems. Securing their energy independence is directly tied to securing their physical landmass.
It is an incredibly daunting list of challenges. I mean, you are asking a nation of roughly 40,000 people spread across an ocean to simultaneously revolutionize their economy, their healthcare delivery, and their energy grid.
It's a tall order.
But as the inequality data showed us, they possess an incredibly strong egalitarian social fabric. They know how to work together.
They do.
And they possess an undeniable world-class intellect forged by those 16.4 years in the class STEM. The capacity to solve these problems is already sitting in their population.
It's all right there.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the data, I want you, the listener, to reflect on what we've actually uncovered today.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
We learned that true human development is infinitely more complex than just making a number go up on a chart. It is not just about logging 17 years at a desk and passing exams.
Definitely not.
True development only happens when a society is structured to transform the knowledge gained in a classroom into actual dignity, political agency, and economic wealth in a person's hands.
Absolutely beautifully said. And stepping back to look at the global picture, I want to leave you with one final concept to ponder.
Let's hear it.
Today, we thoroughly examined the anatomy of an education island. The data from the Marshall Islands proves, unequivocally, that simply pouring knowledge into a population is not a magic bullet.
It's not enough on its own.
No, and it forces a mirror up to your own community. If education alone does not guarantee economic prosperity or political equality, what is the invisible infrastructure of opportunity that a community must actively build to ensure that education actually counts?
Wow. What are the aqueducts in your own society?
Exactly.
Who is building them, and who are they designed to serve? It is a brilliant, unsettling question.
It makes you think.
It really does. When we started, we imagined a society with 16.4 years of schooling, and we assumed it was this effortless, wealthy utopia.
We were very wrong.
We learned that the reality is a fierce, complex struggle between brilliant potential and brutal structural limits. The energy is there, waiting for the grid to be connected. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the averages, keep looking for the hidden mechanics behind the numbers, and we'll see you next time.